Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. President Joe Biden says he stands squarely behind his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. In an address from the White House, Biden blamed Afghan political leaders and their army for the Taliban's takeover. He also threatened a devastating military response if the Taliban launch attacks. The State Department said that the Taliban's behavior will determine whether Washington will recognize any new administration in Kabul. Pakistan says it will remain engaged with the United States and other international partners for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said this to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a phone call. Qureshi said an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan is the best way forward. The United States has voiced alarm over Iran's production of uranium metal and urged Tehran to return to the nuclear talks. The State Department said Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Earlier in a report, the United Nations nuclear watchdog said Iran has produced 200 grams of uranium metal enriched up to 20%. India has registered 437 daily deaths from COVID-19 and more than 25,000 cases. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 95 more people have lost their lives to the virus and over 3,200 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4.3 million lives and infected over 207 million people so far. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. President Joe Biden says he stands squarely behind his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. In an address from the White House, Biden blamed Afghan political leaders and their army for the Taliban's takeover. President Joe Biden has defended his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan despite the Taliban's swift takeover of the country. He threatened a devastating military response if the Taliban launch attacks. Biden said the United States troops should not die in a war the Afghan forces are not willing to fight. Meanwhile, the State Department said the Taliban's behavior will determine whether the United States will recognize the new administration in Kabul. During a press briefing, spokesperson Ned Price said United States will work with a government that upholds human rights and does not harbor terrorists. Meanwhile, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby has dismissed criticism that the United States could not foresee the takeover. But he said Washington did not anticipate the degree to which Afghan forces capitulated. Meanwhile, military flights evacuating diplomats and civilians from Kabul airport has restarted. This comes a day after at least 7 people were killed amid the panic. For more on this, we are joined by Mr. Hamdullah Alamdar, a political analyst speaking to us from Afghanistan. Thank you so much for your time. Now, Mr. Hamdullah, the United States President Joe Biden, in his speech, held the Afghan government for everything wrong in the country and the situation right now. Is it justified for Washington to exonerate itself completely from any responsibility regarding what unfolded in Afghanistan over the past 2 decades?
Well, as an Afghan, I'd like to say that the U.S. cannot take out themselves of this responsibility in Afghanistan for the last 2 decades. Whatever they have done in Afghanistan, they have killed so many people in Afghanistan, and now they are leaving Afghanistan irresponsibly. This is not fair at all, according to all the international rules and regulations. They did not do good to the people of Afghanistan. They killed a lot of people. They destroyed Afghanistan. They used lots of bombs in Afghanistan. And now they say they are not responsible for the lives of the people. They did not come here for the nation building. They just came here to kill Al-Qaeda leader and to finish any threats to the U.S. in Afghanistan. This is not fair at all. They should have worked for the nation building. They should have worked for ensuring or bringing a strong central government in the country, and then they could leave easily. They could surrender the government either to Taliban or any other political parties very responsibly, and then they could leave. But unfortunately, they did not do that. Last night, Mr. Biden talked very irresponsibly, and he said that he is squarely supporting his decision and he will not regret it. But we, the people of Afghanistan, regret his decision. We regret their coming to Afghanistan. We regret their being in Afghanistan. And we also say shame on them for leaving Afghanistan so irresponsibly in a chaos and turmoil. However, the situation in Afghanistan will get better soon. People are trying to cooperate with the Islamic Emirate to finish these chaos and the looting which was done in Kabul for the last 2 days. Everything is going to get better soon, but economically, the Afghan government needs support. The international community should not leave Afghanistan alone. There are so many people. Afghans' lives matter, and the international community has to pay serious attention to that. Otherwise, they will lose Afghanistan, and the people of Afghanistan will be lost, and people of Afghanistan will have no reason to live.
All right. Now, Mr. Alamdar, the President Biden clearly accused President Ashraf Ghani of massive corruption in aid money given by the international community, especially the United States. How would Mr. Ghani be held accountable for these crimes?
Well, I guess that the U.S. and the international community themselves fostered corruption in Afghanistan. Whenever the USACE was giving contracts to the construction companies and to other contractors, they fostered corruption during that times. And through the first day of the U.S. and international community's arrival in Afghanistan, the corruption continued and started in all the departments, in all the organizations of the international organizations or the government organizations. It was not only Dr. Ghani's administration, even during Dr. Hamid Karzai's administration, and in all international organizations or NGOs that were working in Afghanistan, the corruption was a very common thing. International community should be asked for this as well. Not only Dr. Ghani, and all the high official of the government or non-government people who were running the NGOs in Afghanistan, especially the ones who were giving contracts for receiving so many illegal dollars. They all have to be kept responsible for this, and they should be asked for that.
All right, now, Mr. Alamdar, we're already witnessing certain global players warming up to a possible Taliban government in Afghanistan. Short of elections, what do you believe would be the key factors that could lead to international recognition and the legitimization of a Taliban rule?
Well, if Taliban want to be recognized globally, I believe that they should not stop women from working or going to schools. There should be girls and boys education, the university, the schools, and everything should continue. The media should work very independently like it did during the regime of Dr. Ghani and the government of President Hamid Karzai. The work should continue normally. They should not force people to stop working there. Unfortunately, I saw in some of the provinces that they even destroyed the barber shops pictures in which there were some haircut designs or some Western haircut designs, which is not fair. By doing such acts, they will lose their credibility globally. If they want to be credible or recognized by global community or international community, they have to get used to the normal government. They should become a little bit more democratic. Otherwise, people will not accept them. International community will not accept them. They cannot force the Afghan women to stay at home and not to work. They should let women work, and they should cooperate with them. And that's in the favor of everyone, in the favor of Taliban, in the favor of the people, and in the favor of international community. Otherwise, those educated women and girls will have to flee the country as soon as they find any single opportunity for that.
Right. Now, Mr. Hamdard, what is the latest situation at the Kabul airport? Have the international forces taken any arrangements to secure the airport?
The situation of the Kabul airport was at its worst in the history of Afghanistan. We had never seen such a worse situation at the Kabul airport. The people were fleeing, and there was the military airplane of U.S. forces in which some Afghans, some youths were taken out of Afghanistan. According to my information in the reports I received, they were taken to Tajikistan until the next steps will be taken by the U.S. To transfer them or to carry them either to the U.S. or to Canada or somewhere else. But I guess at the moment they are in Tajikistan. They were taken to Tajikistan, and even some young Afghans who could not find place inside that airplane, they held themselves outside of the airplane, and they were just, they lost their lives when the airplane was taking off. And that was so sad to see that scenario. The international community does not value the lives of Afghans. They left Afghans in chaos. They brought, they were supporting the governments, which were led only by the Afghan Americans. They brought the ministers here who were the Afghan Americans. All the corruption made in Afghanistan was made by the Afghan Americans. Those money was taken back to the U.S. So it means the U.S. government and the U.S. is also responsible for all the corruption in Afghanistan. And they have to be asked for this by the United Nations, by the United Nations Security Council, and by all other countries who can make the U.S. responsible, or who can ask them for this responsibility.
All right. Mr. Hamdullah Hamdard, thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. For more on this, we are joined by Ms. Amina Khan, a political analyst, speaking to us from Islamabad. Ms. Amina, thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. Now, Ms. Amina, defending his decision of the Afghan pullout, U.S. President Biden has said that establishing democracy and nation building was never America's mission in the country, whereas U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has been advocating and striving for unified, centralized, democratic government in Afghanistan for years. Isn't that a blatant contradiction in Washington's stance?
Yes, unfortunately, there is a major contradiction when it comes to the American foreign policy, particularly on Afghanistan. Now, when President Biden came into power, we were all expecting, as he stated, that there would be a review of the process, and one certainly did not expect such a hasty withdrawal. One would have expected that from the Trump administration. However, having said that, I think the manner in which it has happened, we are all seeing that the Americans have clearly left Afghanistan in a very unfavorable situation, literally in a lurch. And I think even now it is very convenient for the Americans to say that the onus is now on the Afghans and that they have to sort out the mess themselves. If that was the case, then we would have not have seen this war prolonging for more than 2 decades. Now, I think still with the situation, unraveling, we've seen that the Taliban more or less have literally, taken over Afghanistan in a relatively peaceful manner. We haven't seen, a major exodus of refugees. Yes, there has been internal displacement, and we haven't seen a lot of bloodshed, which is somewhat positive. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this inclusive political setup, which, by the way, was a major point in the U.S.-Taliban agreement. And I just wish that, the Americans had secured this from all sides before withdrawing. However, having said that, there is still time to salvage the situation, and I think the Americans, I've always said this in the past, being a major stakeholder and signatory of the agreement, I think it is imperative they have a responsibility, and that is to leave, after creating some semblance of stability, and that means brokering still a negotiated settlement, if not with the Kabul regime, which no longer is there, but with the other political factions and the Taliban, as we've been hearing about this inclusive political setup. Now, the Taliban themselves have been talking about it, but let's be very honest, their concept of this inclusive setup is also very vague, because they haven't given us a framework. One is hopeful that now that, the situation, it's very clear on the ground, the regional countries are pushing for this, and the Taliban also know that they cannot operate in totality, nor can they operate in isolation, and they will have to reach some sort of an agreement. But again, it is for the Americans to broker some sort of, an inclusive setup.
All right, Ms. Amina, so the United States President promised the world an orderly and responsible exit from Afghanistan, but he admitted now that it was bad, messy, and far from perfect. What would be the consequences of this messy exit on Afghanistan and in the region?
Well, look, I don't know whether you're following, but if you see the scenes, from the Kabul airport, that just shows you the kind of desperation, the kind of frustration and disappointment, the Afghan masses, feel and have been feeling for the, past 20 years, if we just look at, since 9/11. It's very easy to say that, it was a mistake. The fact is, again, as I keep on saying, there is still time to correct the mistake. There is still time to salvage the situation. And I think this is the responsibility that the Americans have. Because, look, for example, with the Taliban have been engaging with regional countries. Pakistan has had a relationship with them from day one. But the day the Americans signed the agreement, they legitimized the Taliban, and they conveniently ignored Kabul. Now, within that framework, the entire onus does lie on the Americans. They can still, correct the mistakes of the past, and that means by brokering, by pushing the Taliban. They do have certain, leverage points that they can, put on the Taliban to come to the negotiating table with the remaining factions that are there. And then, we still have Dr. Abdullah, you've got Hamid Karzai, you've got the former members of the Northern Alliance. So there is a workable structure that's there, and I think, from my understanding, that some sort of an agreement has been reached, but I think they're just waiting for the right moment. And I think within this week, we are going to see progress on this front.
All right. Ms. Amina Khan, thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. The world is scrambling to adapt to the new reality in Afghanistan that has unfolded rather abruptly. With the Taliban takeover of Kabul and the United States withdrawal, only Pakistani, Chinese, and Russian embassies are now functioning in the Taliban-led Afghanistan. More in this report. As the highly fluid situation in Afghanistan starts taking some form and shape, the international community weighs in. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his U.S. counterpart Antony Blinken that it was Washington's hasty pullout that had a serious negative impact. This comes as Blinken sought the world's coordination to handle the state of affairs in Afghanistan. In a phone call, Wang pleaded to work for stability in Afghanistan, but he said the United States tries to harm China's interests. Blinken also spoke separately with his counterparts in Russia, the United Kingdom, and Turkey, as well as the European Union and NATO chiefs. Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov agreed to continue consultations with Pakistan, China, and others to enable an inclusive intra-Afghan dialogue in the new environment. Earlier, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said the United States does not want to be held responsible for its geopolitical experiments. Zakharova also blamed the United States for the chaos at the Kabul airport, which left 7 people dead. Britain, meanwhile, has stressed the need to prevent Afghanistan from being used as a base for terrorist groups. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the same sentiments and pledged to do everything for the world to cooperate on Afghan matters. Earlier, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said the United States' defeat in Afghanistan is a chance for peace. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai urged United States President as well as the United Kingdom to take bold steps to protect Afghans. In an interview, Yousafzai urged countries to open their borders to Afghan refugees. Pakistan says it will remain engaged with the United States and other international partners for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said this to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a phone call. Qureshi said an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan is the best way forward. The foreign minister apprised Secretary Blinken of Islamabad's efforts to facilitate the evacuation. Qureshi also underlined Islamabad's commitment to forging a long-term and broad-based relationship with Washington. Meanwhile, Saudi Army Chief said Riyadh acknowledges Islamabad's achievements in war against terrorism and supported its efforts for regional peace. General Fayyad bin Hamid al-Rawali said this in a meeting with Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. He thanked Pakistan Army for its sustained assistance and training of Saudi armed forces and expressed desires to enhance bilateral ties. The United States has voiced alarm over Iran's production of uranium metal and urged Tehran to return to the nuclear talks. The State Department said Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Earlier in a report, the UN nuclear watchdog said Iran has produced 200 grams of uranium metal enriched up to 20%. The watchdog said this is the third of a four-step plan by Iran. The UN agency noted that the final step includes producing a reactor fuel pellet. Iran's work on enriched uranium metal has angered the world powers as the technology can be used to make the core of a nuclear bomb. However, Tehran insists its aims are entirely peaceful and it is developing a new type of reactor fuel. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. India has registered 437 daily deaths from COVID-19 and more than 25,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed over 4.3 million lives and infected more than 207 million people so far. More in this report. As COVID-19's Delta variant sweeps the world, hospitalizations are rising exponentially amid mounting vaccine hesitancy. In France, the number of hospitalized people has gone over 10,000 for the first time since the 22nd of June. Washington has issued an advisory against traveling to Turkey, citing the rising number of cases there. Amid resurging cases and crumbling economy in Argentina, hundreds took to the streets to protest against the government's handling of the pandemic.
I think this is a release for everyone after all the anguish of not being able to protest, because apparently it was bad to show anguish because of the pandemic. It was bad to suffer. But in contrast with what we saw last year, with restrictions of get-togethers that were broken by those in power, it's now a moment to recover from so much pain and so much injustice.
The Tokyo 2020 Paralympics organizers have announced not to have any spectators at the Games due to the outbreak in Japan. This comes as the country extends the state of emergency in Tokyo and other regions to the 12th of September and widens curbs to 7 more prefectures. In New Zealand, the first case of COVID-19 in the community has been reported in 6 months after a person tested positive in Auckland. Australian authorities have also warned Sydney residents to brace for a surge in infections in the coming weeks due to the Delta variant.
And we envisage that case numbers in the next 2 or 3 weeks will bounce around and are likely to go up substantially. And we have to brace ourselves for that. But our key aim will be keeping people out of hospital and keeping people alive. And that's why the vaccination rate obviously helps us with that. Of course, we need to see case numbers come down.
In Vietnam, thousands of jobless workers are fleeing after an extension of restrictions in the largest city of Ho Chi Minh, in the epicenter of the country's worst outbreak yet. But authorities are anxious to prevent them from leaving the city and potentially spreading the virus to other parts of the country. In Pakistan, coronavirus has claimed another 95 lives over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says that the death toll has reached 24,573. It said more than 3,200 people tested positive for COVID-19 overnight. The ministry said that the positivity rate of cases declined to 6.68%. Pakistan's caseload has exceeded 1.1 million, while more than 933,000 people have recovered. The ministry said there are more than 87,000 active cases, with nearly 9,400 in critical condition. It said so far 43.4 million vaccine doses have been administered in the country. In Venezuela, the government and opposition have discussed establishing an inclusive consultation mechanism to end the political crisis in the country. In a joint statement, the two sides said they will meet again from the 3rd of September to the 6th of September for a fresh round of talks. The latest round of negotiations was held in Mexico City, and representatives of Norway acted as the facilitators. The parties agreed to a memorandum of understanding containing the roadmap that will guide the dialogue process. Both sides set their demands for the talks to advance to a potential agreement. President Nicolas Maduro asked for the sanctions imposed by the United States and Europe to be lifted. For its part, the opposition coalition calls to allow humanitarian aid to enter Venezuela. It has also demanded the release of dozens of supporters and to be allowed to participate in the regional elections in November. In Haiti, the death toll from a powerful quake that struck the country on Saturday has risen to over 1,400, with nearly 7,000 injured. Rescue workers are rushing to locate the survivors of the deadly quake as a tropical storm hit the Caribbean nation. Meanwhile, an unknown number of people are still missing. Authorities struggling to provide shelters for at-risk residents, with families contending with makeshift tents to protect them from the storm. Tropical depression Grace is expected to dump up heavy rainfall over the worst affected area in the country. It is feared that the torrent could trigger landslides. The death toll from Turkey's floods has risen to 77 as emergency crews search for more victims and survivors in the Black Sea region. Turkey's Disaster Management Authority said 62 people have died in Kastamonu province alone. It said that at least 46 people are still missing in Kastamonu and Sinop, while 7 people are injured. It said rescue and relief efforts continue in the flood-hit areas, with thousands of personnel and other huge equipment deployed. Triggered by heavy rain, floods caused buildings to collapse, smashed bridges, clogged streets with wrecked cars, and cut power supplies. In Indonesia, a group of volunteers helps pets left behind when their owners tested positive for COVID-19 and are hospitalized or placed in isolation. A rights group, Animal Defender, has launched the Project AD19 program for this purpose. More in this report. The pets picked up by Animal Defender usually get a checkup before going to an existing animal shelter. The AD19 program has in the past month added 40 dogs and 4 cats to more than 160 guests already at the shelter. Founder Donnie Haradu Tana has been selling homemade food and clothes for cats and dogs to raise cash for the care of unsupervised pets. The pet shelter costs about $8,341 to run each month, and no donations or payments are accepted from owners.
Bentuk-bentuk pertolongannya kita sesuaikan.
We adjust the form of assistance according to the needs of the pet owners, either to evacuate and take care of it completely, or we take care of it temporarily, like Gladys, or we help to feed the animals, clean the cage or bath the dogs. We will do everything according to the owner's request.
Meanwhile, concerns about virus transmission from animals to humans also complicated the situation, and many pets were abandoned. However, veterinarian Magda Rumawas said people should not be worried, and COVID-19 patients in self-isolation can keep the pets by their side to ease the anxiety.
A lot of people who tested positive for COVID-19 asked me what should they do with their dogs. It would be good if the dogs are there to accompany the owners during the self-isolation period, because they can keep people entertained and they can help to reduce stress, which is good. But do not hug or kiss dogs, because it can transfer the droplets of coronavirus.
Tana said that many owners had passed away and their pets are abandoned now. Meanwhile, the country is battling the worst epidemic in Asia, with more than 3.7 million confirmed cases and over 100,000 deaths. The pets picked up. U.S. regulator has opened a safety probe into auto giant Tesla's AUTOPILOT following a series of crashes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said there have been 11 crashes since 2018 due to AUTOPILOT. The probe will take in 767,000 U.S. vehicles with autopilot built since 2014. Tesla shares closed down 4.3% on the news. Chief Executive Elon Musk has repeatedly defended autopilot. In April, he tweeted, "Tesla with autopilot is now approaching 10 times lower chance of accident than the average vehicle." Asian stock markets have declined amid turmoil in Afghanistan and unease about China's economic outlook after weak July activity. Investors also reacted to the draft rules that China issued today amid a stopping unfair competition on the internet. Hong Kong's Hang Seng led the losses, dripping nearly 2%. Shares in mainland China also dived close to 2%. Seoul's Kospi shed more than 1%. ASX 200 in Australia sipped nearly 1%. Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped marginally. In cricket, Rawalakot Hawks and Muzaffarabad Tigers will meet in the final of the Kashmir Premier League. Earlier, Hawks beat Mirpur Royals by 4 wickets with 2 balls to spare in the second eliminator. Sharjeel Khan's 141 runs went in vain as the Hawks chased down the mammoth total of 237 runs. Thanks to Kashif Ali's blistering century, he sealed the victory for his team with a stylish 6. Hussain Thalit scored 51 runs for the Hawks. It's now time to take a look at the weather updates from around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at Indus.News.